Welcome to the Cyber Sangha podcast. Cyber Sangha is a program of free live broadcasts, launched in 2009 by renowned teacher and author Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche. Join us as we draw on ancient Tibetan wisdom to discover how to connect with our best self and live to our highest potential. The following conversation, Spacious Embrace, When Feeling Lonely, Find the Friend Within, happened on May 11th, 2023, as a science and spirituality dialogue with renowned teacher and author Sharon Salzberg, researcher Emily Lindsay, Tibetan meditation master Geshe Tenzin Wangyal, and host Alejandro Chaoul. This was part of a year-long series on embracing life with wisdom and compassion. This content is for informational purposes only. Listeners should consult medical professionals for any physical or mental health concerns. Please use headphones and do not meditate while driving or operating machinery.
Welcome, everyone, to Cyber Sangha. My name is Alejandro Chaoul-Reich, and I'm delighted to host this dialogue within this Cyber Sangha, which was the brainchild of Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche. And we meet every month for many different things, including full moon for 24 hours, passing it country to country, different languages, beautiful. So hope you join us next time. We just had it last week. And also for these dialogues and also for teachings from Rinpoche. And so I think most of the audience here knows Rinpoche, but I'll just say a few words, as he is trained in India in a Tibetan monastery, in Mendri Monastery, Medicine Mountain Monastery, and then came to the West after he obtained his Geshe degree. And since he's been in the West over 30 years, he's really been kind of studying us as well, studying the minds and what we need. And he realized that Cyber Sangha is something that can reach. And what's interesting, and I'm biased, I've been with Rinpoche for 30 years, but his insight into Cyber Sangha was way before actually COVID. And so really thinking of how do we reach? How is that expansive reach? So thank you, Rinpoche, for always thinking of how to reach our hearts in different ways. And today, this is part of a dialogue of different topics. And last month, we were talking about anxiety. Today, we'll talk about loneliness and how we can overcome it or how we can accept it and how we live with it, which is very much kind of the book that Sharon wrote. And what we are calling it is Spacious Embrace. When feeling lonely, find a friend within. And many of you know Sharon Salzberg. She's an acclaimed author and meditation pioneer. She's been teaching for over 4 decades. And one of her main topics for what she's known is loving kindness, and also of being open to tell her story of what brought her to these practices and how these practices changed her. She has a number of books. I think around 12 books. And A Real Happiness has been one, and kind of this real life, this aspects of life. And her last book, it's actually about loneliness. And I'll ask her in a minute about that. But I wanted also to introduce our other speaker, Dr. Emily Lindsay. And Emily is a research professor of psychology at the University of Pittsburgh. And her theory-driven research shows how mindfulness interventions improve health outcomes via stress buffering pathways and acceptance. And she'll talk more about some of the research. And particularly, I want to focus on one of her papers about how mindfulness training reduces loneliness and increases social contact in this randomized controlled trial. So welcome, Emily, welcome, Sharon, and of course, welcome, Rinpoche. And before I go into the speakers, I do want to thank all the people that are behind that don't get seen, Polly, Milos, Mariela, and others that are helping behind the scenes, and you don't get to see them, but without them, this wouldn't happen. So thank you, everyone. I wanted to start with Sharon, and Sharon, I heard you speak many times, and been very blessed to be in meditations with you. And when I read that you were talking, you were bringing in your kind of this real life, many of those books, many of those aspects, this journey from isolation to openness and freedom. And I wanted to ask you if you would share kind of personally what brought you to talk about that in that way, and to bring it as part of this real life series.
Well, thank you. It's wonderful to be here with all of you, and I, like many other people, although not everybody, but many, was living in a pretty severe lockdown during the beginning of the pandemic. I was in New York City, where I often spend time, and I have an apartment, and I have a house in a retreat center here in Barre, Massachusetts. And in New York, I had the thought, there's so much anxiety, there's so much illness, so much is going on. We don't know what's going to happen. Let me go up to Barre for 2 weeks and ride it out till it's over. So I came up here in March of 2020 with my snow boots, and of course I was here for quite a long time, and I'm here again. But so part of, I think, what my interest was that my life was in upheaval. It was so different from what I had expected, and thereby, like many people's lives, where expectations have been shattered. I also saw a program on YouTube, having grown up in the Jewish tradition. It was a program for the Passover Seder, and it reminded me that that journey, which is really the journey of all people toward freedom, was a journey from, symbolically taking it completely out of geopolitics. The word Egypt means a narrow place, a tight place. So it's the journey from that kind of constriction to openness, to freedom. And so taking that symbolically, there were so many things about that journey that fascinated me. That there's a difference, for example, between being purposeful and determined and one-pointed and being constricted. They're different. And, that sense of being trapped and being overcome by fear or not able to breathe and no options. That's what I mean by constriction. And it'd be interesting to talk about where loneliness fits in that whole arc. And I was fascinated by the idea that some of the very things we are taught will make us happiest, when we really look at them, they make us feel most trapped, like endless consumption, or that kind of it's a dog eat dog world. Don't help anybody else, and you're all alone, and so many things. And shame was one of them. Not the rightful kind of regret or remorse, but that kind of wholesale condemnation of oneself, and that kind of lacerating self-hatred. Sometimes we're taught that's the way forward, and it's not, because it leaves us feeling so trapped. So I just got so interested in that. And then, of course, there's the beauty of just those moments, even when we can breathe free and we see options and we understand that we are so connected, even if we're all alone, that I thought that would make a good book. And then, that became the arc of the book.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you so much. Emily, I wanted to ask you, I mean, you, as a psychologist and research psychologist, you look into many different topics, and you've done many research together also with David Creswell on different aspects of mindfulness. But particularly there was at least one paper that I know of you that really focused on loneliness and how increased social contact was helpful. If you can tell us both what led you to write, to look into that? Is it something similar to what Sharon said? Because it is around that time, at least that was published, but I know that until it gets published, probably it started years before. And this was published in 2019. So this was kind of before COVID, but you were already looking at it. If you can tell us a little bit why and maybe any personal aspects and so forth.
Sure. Yeah, that's a big question. But I came to that study having this interest in mindfulness meditation in general and how it affects such a broad range of different psychological and health outcomes. And from my personal experience, being a very self-critical, ruminative, overthinker type, it occurred to me that that there's this aspect of mindfulness meditation where you're bringing greater awareness to the present moment, but this other piece where this equanimity piece where you're open and accepting and welcoming of all of these experiences, that's the piece that really felt transformative in my experience. And then dipping into the scientific literature, that theme comes up a lot, that it's these changes in acceptance through different contemplative interventions that seems to explain how they impact stress and mental health and so forth. So I set out to explore this idea that it's acceptance and equanimity that's really a powerful key ingredient for a lot of these emotion and stress and social relationship types of benefits. So the study that you talked about, we designed a 14-lesson mindfulness training program that focused on present-focused awareness of body sensations, both physical and emotional body sensations. And in one version of the program, we really emphasized equanimity and gave concrete practices for how to welcome in experiences. And then in another intervention condition, we took all of that training out. So it was just training in learning how to monitor the present moment experience. And then we had a third group that didn't do mindfulness at all. They were doing some more common coping techniques. And what we found in that study was that only the group who learned acceptance and equanimity skills showed lower loneliness in daily life following the training. And they also showed they were having about 2 more social interactions each day after the mindfulness training program with acceptance. So that really supported this idea that it's something about learning to welcome in and be open to all experiences, allowing them in and letting them go, allowing them to flow, that really has an impact on how people feel, about themselves. And this loneliness is more of a feeling, it's more subjective, whereas social interactions are more objective. But it really seemed to have an impact on the way people are sort of interacting and perceiving their social environment. That seemed very helpful.
Thank you, Emily. So Rinpoche, you usually when you talk about how to work with aspects like loneliness, and as we have it here, it's like this spacious embrace, really connecting to that space that I think it resonates with both what Sharon and Emily were saying, kind of going from the narrow place to freedom or to openness and spaciousness, really accepting whatever is there. You many times use this aspect of space of allowing, and Emily was saying this flow and equanimity. If you can tell us more about kind of in your experience, this aspect of spacious embrace, how does work both for you, but also probably what you heard from many of your students. So in the meantime, as he gets back, Sharon, I wanted to go back to you, and as I was saying off camera too, as I was reading the excerpt of your book and in Tricycle, and actually you were in Houston where I am, and I remember actually having coffee with you here in Houston, but in this case you were with Joseph Goldstein, and you were talking to someone, and you were talking about that never left Houston, kind of this, again, maybe this narrow part. Um, but then it was about kind of wanting to go to Wyoming. Why Wyoming? Because kind of big space, again, this openness, this, and then if I remember what I read right, Joseph said, you can have an inner Wyoming experience. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and both in terms of maybe that interaction, but more importantly, kind of how you connect to that?
Sure. Well, I think Joseph and I were, and these friends we were visiting in Houston, we were at a restaurant picking up dinner to bring back to this friend's house. And Joseph was just chatting with, fairly young men working behind the counter while we were waiting for our food. And that's when the guy said, like, all my life, I've never left Houston. And I've just had this dream of getting to Wyoming. And Joseph said, well, what do you think you'll find in Wyoming? Like, what's the big deal about Wyoming? And he just painted this picture of like unconfined sky and like openness and space. And Joseph said, even more telling, he said, there is an inner Wyoming too. And the guy said, that's freaky. And he walked away, which is fascinating too, about that glimmer of possibility. Like, no way, that's freaky. That's weird. This is life, as it is, and that's a moment where many of us take a right turn. It's like, I was going down this certain road, and it's like, look at that. My life is very different. And sometimes it's so vague, but it's so important. Just that sense of possibility and capacity.
So what I find interesting too is his response, right? Because I think that's many of our inner, like, that's freaky. What do you mean inner space? What do you mean inner Wyoming, or whatever is your connection to that inner space? And I think many of us, particularly when we are, now that we are actually, this month is mental health awareness, right? That we close and almost like we don't want to hear that there's a possibility of openness, that there's a possibility of freedom. What do you mean freedom? There's no freedom. Look at me, right? And so I think that's part of what's important. And so recuperating Rinpoche here, I'm going to ask you, Rinpoche, if you can, and if you can unmute.
So first of all, I wanted to say, Sharon and Emily, thank you for joining us with your precious moments sharing with us. I wanted to say that. And my internet connection is not so good. It might cut off, so I will just speak as if everything is going right. I heard a little bit Alex's question, but I'm just going to say a few words about the loneliness, and so maybe hopefully what you asked me and what I'm talking is connected. So, so I've been thinking a little bit about this sense of loneliness, and so what does that mean personally for me, and also in the teaching, and again and again I have this sense of that loneliness is clearly a sign of disconnection with yourself. So idea of when we talk about from very restriction to fully openness. So idea of restriction to fully openness, that fully openness is what we have referred to as ourself, the boundless space and infinite awareness, where we talk about that to losing connection to that aspect of ourself is the primary cause of the loneliness. And I think I heard Emily was saying also, like the being in the present moment, focusing on feeling sensation. I think it's the same thing. Again, it's you can have a connection to the unbounded aspect of yourself that you feel completely happy with being in no one, having whatever it is. So that connection to that is the ultimate connection. But even when you have the idea of you don't have a connection to this unbounded space, but you do have a lot of pain and sense of loneliness, even kind of depression, sadness, even that requires a connection. Because if you don't connect with that, then that is also comes as a results into a loneliness, I think, because the loneliness seems like is, in short word, is a lack of connection. Either the big self or small self and its story requires a connection too. It requires a process and connection too. So I think that seems very, very clear. And then also the other thing is sometimes when we are more connected to ourselves or connected to the people around us, our feeling, our thoughts, we will not be searching so much. You know, I think the loneliness is also seems like very much a result of a search, the active searching and feeling you're not finding anything and you don't even know what you're looking for, and but still searching, getting exhausted, feeling sad, not finding something that, you know. So I'll very much like outcome of that. So I think the practices or paying more close attention to whatever we are feeling, even the sense of loneliness and sadness that which comes out of loneliness, even being with it, paying attention to embracing it, even having some kind of dialogue with it. So I think all those things seems like very, very helpful.
Thank you, Rinpoche. Emily, as I was, hearing all the different responses from Rinpoche and Sharon, this lack of connection, that response of that person in Houston, that's freaky. What in your studies and in your experience also, have you encountered that aspect of, in a way, contrary to what you found in the positive results, the non-acceptance, the non-equanimity, the not connection? Have you found that, and how were you able to, through these practices, able to kind of open from the narrow to the large?
I think that the way that we conduct research, you have to volunteer to sign up for a study. So we may not be catching people who aren't already somewhat intrigued and open to this sort of practice, or at least, a lot of times we'll advertise for stress management. So there's some aspect where we are reaching with our studies a sample of people who are open to trying something new. So that's a problem, that we're not reaching everybody, but maybe it's not for everybody at the same time. I think when we are offering a meditation practice in a research study, it tends to be a little bit more concrete, guided instruction rather than like a blow your mind sort of statement like Inner Wyoming. So I think we try hard to make it tangible and concrete and understandable for participants, which actually I think is something that Sharon does really well in her work, is this really down-to-earth approach that people can really relate to. So I don't know if that answers part of your question, but just
it does. And I think you bring a good point in terms of sometimes depends on how we advertise the studies, right? Are we doing it as a mindfulness study, or are we doing it as you said, as a stress management? And a little bit like what Rinpoche said, I am lonely. I'm looking for something. I've been searching this, I've been searching that. Okay, there's a study, and usually people also, well, it's coming from the University of Pittsburgh or maybe I'll try it out. It's research based. And so do you find those kind of people reaching out? And then of course you randomize them. And then of course they might be like, oh, I didn't get randomized to the study. They may not know it at the beginning, right? I don't know what your control group was. But
Yeah.
but hopefully you have a wait list that they come in later and they get it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's all I have to say about that. I did think of something else, just to take it a different direction, but I wanted to give sort of a psychological evolutionary perspective on loneliness, because it's something I find really interesting in that that we're social creatures, and historically and even now, even though it doesn't feel like it, we need each other. And so this evolutionary perspective is that loneliness evolved in a way that it's a distressing feeling that can motivate people to reach out and reconnect with others in ways that can then bring them back to the community and help with survival. But I think now loneliness kind of stops at that distressing part, where it feels uncomfortable and distressing, and maybe the motivation isn't to connect with other people in real life or to listen to that feeling and how it unfolds and how it relates to other parts of our experience, but maybe to like distract in many different ways, but in a way that doesn't really address that deep feeling of isolation potentially. But yeah, I just wanted to mention that because so many things that come up as problems were really evolved as solutions. And so anyway.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, and many times what used to help at one point, it doesn't help anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the difficult of being vulnerable, which, as you well said, Sharon is so good at this, and Rinpoche.
Mm-hmm.
Sharon, if I may read this very short poem that from in your book from that it's from Vila, who was at 7 years old at that time, and because you're talking about how the importance in loneliness of friendship, and all of you are saying the same, Rinpoche and Emily too, this kind of connection, the being with others, but this, I thought it was so touching. Someone 7 years old, and if I may I read it? Is that okay? Yeah.
Please do.
So it's called Peace is Friendship, and it says, peace looks like nature. Peace smells like fresh air. Peace sounds like wind blowing through the trees. Peace tastes like bubble gum. Peace feels like a soft pillow. So, Sharon, can you tell us more about peace and friendship?
Yes, thank you for reading that. I want to start by saying how much I have appreciated Rinpoche's teachings for years and years and years. And meeting Emily today for the first time, I really appreciate many things about what you said, including the inclusion of equanimity as part of understanding mindfulness, which has been one of my things for a very long time, with great futility often. And I keep, said for years, maybe decades now, there's a secret ingredient in that mindfulness. It's not just noticing what's going on. There are many things going on. So Willa is actually my goddaughter. She's in her 20s now. She became my goddaughter when I had met her mother first, and then met Willa. She was maybe 3 years old, maybe 4 years old. And she said to her mother, Sharon is my fairy godmother. And her mother said, well, you know, you have to ask. And so she said, you can ask, but she is. So they asked me, and I said, well, yeah, I'd love to be her godmother. So she's actually, I haven't had children, so she's the closest I've had to a really intimate relationship with a child growing up. And she's remarkable. And just to continue on Willa for a moment, when she was about 9 years old, she started dictating emails to me through her mother. So this is the first email. I've been thinking about things, and I wonder if you can help me out. Where did love come from? Where did space come from? Do love and space have anything to do with one another? Tell me everything you know. So I was like, whoa. And that, in a way, and I tried to answer her. You know, I'd heard a quotation from the Buddha, develop a mind so filled with love it resembles space, that cannot be painted, cannot be marred, cannot be ruined. Develop a mind so filled with love, that unconfined, that unconstrained, that free, that it cannot be ruined through even a very garish wrong color of paint. So I wrote some kind of kid version of that to her. And I said, it's like if somebody says something that hurts your feelings, of course you feel that pain, you know, but it could either be like clouds moving through space, or you can take it to heart and get soggy and filled with it and, you know, all messed up. So then I didn't hear back from her. So then about a month later, her mother wrote me and said Willa had gotten into an argument with her little sister and was going around the house muttering, I am like the sky, I am not a sponge. I am like the sky, I am not a sponge. And her mother was ecstatic. She said she's working it, you know. So I think, as a rather long answer to your question, it has to do with love, because I have been fascinated since well before the pandemic, reading some of those studies about the role of social connection as a healing modality in various clinical conditions. And I kept thinking, it cannot just be a numbers game. I only have 2 friends, I need 8. It must be some inner sense of belonging to the whole, of being a part of life, of genuinely seeing interconnection, of wisdom, basically, that, you know, perhaps we then change our lives somewhat and we have more interactions, or we, you know, maybe we just thank people more. I think one of the burdens we have is cultural, in that the idea of closeness or intimacy is very narrow. You know, it has to be romantic, it has to be a certain way, but we can find a profound sense of connection because we're actually connected already, you know, and so we need to pay attention very differently, and sometimes that's through love in a very different sense than we ordinarily use it.
Thank you. Rinpoche, you know, this I am like sky. I mean, you use this also a lot, and as you know, this aspect of spaciousness, the spacious embrace, and kind of not focusing on absorbing everything like a sponge, and not being, as you many times talk about, pain identity. Can you talk a little bit about this spacious embrace and how that kind of supports the aspect of, you know, of not being lonely, of connection, and even of love?
So according, like in the Dzogchen teaching, we think about Kundu Sangpo, all good. And Kundu Sangpo, idea of Kundu Sangpo, all good, is when you know yourself, who you are, then you know Kundu Sangpo within, or the Buddha within. And when you know Kundu Sangpo, so this, since that is it's no one, not that what you identify with, not your pain identity. Since it's no one, it can be anyone. If it can be anyone and whatever in any given moment you want it to be. Or, for example, idea of friend. It is very clearly in the teaching, they use this idea of being friend. It's mentioned many times. So you are your friend. So if you're looking somehow, some aspect of you within you, if you're looking for a friend, you have a friend within you. If you're looking a guide in your life, you have a guide within you. If you are looking for connection, connection is within you. If you're looking for love, love is within you. So that unbounded space encompasses all the quality which is necessary for us, for our growth. So the idea, I think, in some sense of opening to that boundlessness is because it can give you all the connections that you need any given moment. So I think that's the idea. So when we lose the connection to the unbounded aspect, or when we identify with ourselves, with our role and what we feel, what we think, what we have, what we do, these are kind of limited identity or the pain identity we have. When we identify with them, and particularly in some deep sense, we think that's who we are. Thinking about my pain identity is my spaciousness. It's not my spaciousness. My pain identity will not give you the friend that you're looking for, as the spaciousness will, the presence, the friend is present in that spaciousness. So I think that whole idea of, as I was saying earlier, that losing this primordial connection to yourself, and then you think about your pain identity as that big self, and then not feeling that you're getting things from that pain identity, expecting to be very happy with the pain identity is hard to be. And then exhausting yourself, becoming a kind of hopeless. And I think then deeper sense of sadness, loneliness, depression, I think all comes out of that simple disconnection. So I think that's my general sense.
Thank you, Rinpoche. You know, I was also, I mean, it's very clear that this sense of connection and what you're talking, for me, it reminds me very much of this aspect of inner Wyoming, right? But we always look for the outer Wyoming.
What is inner Wyoming? I don't know.
Sorry, you missed the. So Sharon, I'll just paraphrase it if that's okay. So Sharon tells in her book that when she was actually here in Houston with Joseph Goldstein, and they met this person in a restaurant, and this person, they were talking, and this person was saying he never left Houston and he wanted to go to Wyoming. And when Joseph asked him why Wyoming, he says, this open space, this freedom. And Joseph said, you can have an inner Wyoming. And the guy responded, that's freaky. Like, that's really weird, right? And because why? Because we're always looking for the outer Wyoming or for the connections with others. It's like, oh, I need more friends, or I need more this. How do we connect? How can we tell the audience how to connect to that inner aspect with or without that? I mean, of course, the outer supports, no doubt, but when we can't, what are things that we can do?
I think the deeper sense that, okay, now I get it in Wyoming. So I think earlier Emily said that we are social creatures. We need connections. We need friends. We need to somebody to talk to. Even the practice of longevity, they're supposed to be done studies in Harvard University where people who are able to reach out when they need help, and people who are able to give help when others need help, that even that idea of able to give and receive, they live much longer than people who don't. So as simple as that, or people who have social interaction are a healthy thing. It's a practice of longevity. So I always say that if you can live longer connecting with someone, for sure you can live much longer if you're connecting with yourself. So then, of course, this question, whenever we say something like that, is question comes up. What do you mean by self? Who is the self? So that opens up whole confusions about, many people have a different idea of self that we don't refer to. Like we say, I'm no one is who you are. You're not someone. You're no one. People don't like the idea of saying no one. You're no one, because if you are not, I'm no one, then I can be anyone. Then I can find anything. If I'm someone, if I don't finding something, then I cannot find something. If I can deconstruct that someone in me. So the idea of, I think, it really like comes down to this question about, I always find it is very, very critical or very important that to define a little bit more the sense of self every time we refer to a sense of self, to be more clear about what we are saying, because it's very confusing. You can talk about inner Wyoming is one self, outer Wyoming is another self. So when you're talking about the self, which one is you're talking about, the inner one or outer one? But they're totally different, and they're equally important for different people. Which one you are looking for? So obviously, most of the time, we are looking for inner one, but we are confused. Therefore, we are looking for outer one. But when you found something outside, that point, somebody need to say, yes, enjoy this one, but this is not it. This is the help. While you have a help, find the better one, the inner one, so that you will never lose it. This is guaranteed to be losing, right?
Thank you, Rinpoche. Yeah, so the external support is useful, but we will lose it. So a more trustworthy is that inner one. Sharon, I know you teach the same. So what are your words as you bring that to your audience?
Well, I partly through training, partly probably through personality, I usually start with the problem, like, all those constricting states, the addictive tendency, the shame, the loneliness, let's not try to annihilate them to get beyond them. Let's start with trying to have that embrace, as Rinpoche would say, or, that presence, or we could even say mindfulness, if we have that understanding of mindfulness, to that very state. And that's really a critical aspect of the journey. So I say it in lots of different ways. You have to forgive yourself for what you feel. That every feeling, it's arising out of conditions. Don't blame yourself. Like, I should have been able to stop this. Allow every feeling the dignity of its own expression. Don't let it take over necessarily and guide you into action, because actions are consequential. But we're going to really look at the holding environment, at the space around, or the way we are with the relationship, basically, to this state. And I tend to emphasize that a lot. That's a very forgiving state. And it's true, I look back, of course, at my own practice where I fretted and I was so upset. I went to India when I was 18. That's when I began meditating. And so I was very naive in so many ways and very unhappy. And I'm somewhat famous amongst that group of people. S.N. Goenka was my first teacher, for once having marched up to him and saying, I never used to be an angry person before I started meditating, thereby blaming him, which of course I knew it was his fault. And really, of course, I'd been hugely angry, but I hadn't realized it. And so looking within, there it was, and so many things. And learning how to be okay with that was difficult and very, very important for me. And so that's what I tend to emphasize, even probably more than the glories of the inner Wyoming, which of course is very important, because if you don't have some even tentative, quivering sense of that possibility, you're not going to do anything, so.
Thank you. Emily, is that what you emphasize and in your results when you talked about acceptance?
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Sharon puts it into very relatable terms. But all of that really seems like the sort of transformative part of the practice, especially for beginners, I think, and especially in like Western culture. I was listening to one of the early dialogues with the Dalai Lama, Sharon, and you and others were trying to describe how Westerners are self-critical and we don't like ourselves, and it was like he did not understand. He couldn't comprehend how we could feel this way towards ourselves. But it's internalized in so many people, to just criticize and judge ourselves and block off uncomfortable and difficult experiences, and so this work of embracing those difficult emotions and sensations, and thoughts, is really the part that I think a lot of us need, and so that's what we were trying to teach in that study.
Mm.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, and the part of this translation, right, and Rinpoche the same, right? That like the Dalai Lama like doesn't like what do you mean?
Right.
You're not liking yourself. It's like what? So and then we get to these practices. Sharon, I would like to invite you to do a practice for us. And as we were saying earlier, in a way, take the time you need.
Okay, well, thank you. Why don't we sit together for a few minutes? You can sit comfortably, eyes open or closed as you are accustomed to practicing or as you feel comfortable. And we can start by listening to sounds. It could be the sound of my voice or other sounds. And while, of course, we like certain sounds and we don't like others, we don't have to chase after them to hold on or push away. Just let them come, let them go. Unless you are responsible for responding to the sound, see if you can just wash through you. Bring your attention to your body, sitting, whatever sensations you discover. See if you can feel the earth supporting you. And feel space touching you. Usually we think about touching space, we think about picking up a finger and poking it in the air. Space is already touching us. It's always touching us. Bring your attention to your hands and see if you can make the shift from the more conceptual level, let go fingers, to the world of direct sensation. Picking up pulsing, throbbing, warmth, coolness, whatever it might be. You don't have to name these things, but feel them. This is also the world of constant change. Bring your attention to the feeling of your breath. Just the normal, natural breath. Wherever you feel it most distinctly, maybe the nostrils, the chest, or the abdomen. You can find that place, bring your attention there, and just rest. See if you can feel one breath. Without concern for what's already gone by. Without leaning forward for even the very next breath. Just this one. And images or sounds, sensations or emotions may arise. But if they're not that strong, if you can stay connected to the feeling of the breath, just let them flow on by. You're breathing. It's just one breath. If they are strong, notice how you are with them. Can you simply recognize this is what's happening right now? There's joy, there's sorrow, there's anger. Or are you upset about it? Or you're ashamed of it? Whatever. If you notice the reaction, see if you can gentle that voice and recognize this is just what's happening right now. It's okay. And then bring your attention back to the feeling of the breath. And for all those, perhaps many times you're just gone, lost in thought, spun out in a fantasy, or you fall asleep, truly don't worry about it. What we're really interested in is the next moment after you've been gone. How do you speak to yourself then? Do you feel like a failure, or you're all freaked out? Or here too, can you say, this is what happens. Let me let go and begin again. So the poetic way we say that sometimes is the healing is in the return, not in never having wandered to begin with. Don't worry about it. We let go, we start over. And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes or lift your gaze, and we'll end the meditation. Thank you.
Thank you. Beautiful. I love that the healing is in the return. Beautiful. So as we slowly start going to the last part, Rinpoche, Emily, any other things that you want to bring up as we think of this spacious embrace of the practices of meditation, whether it's mindfulness, other practices, and particularly as Sharon was saying, how things such as equanimity and loving kindness are so much part of it too. Maybe in some of the language that Rinpoche uses kind of from the spacious, the awareness and warmth. So whatever anyone wants to add at this point. I'm looking if there's questions from the audience, and I think there's no questions, which is left them open.
Okay, maybe I'll just say a few words. Nobody wanted to say anything. So, so the idea of, you can be alone, but you don't have to feel loneliness. You can be by yourself, with yourself, but not feel lonely, isolated. And so that clearly there's experiences like that. There are people who live in the caves whole life by themselves in a small community, few people. There's not much story about feeling loneliness, the way that we describe loneliness. So I think in the West, there's this clearly, I think it's generally human being, sentient being, our journey really feels like that we are looking to know ourselves. We're really longing to know ourselves, longing to connect with ourselves. But then we translate ourselves, not this boundless aspect of self, but the bounded identity of self, and expecting everything. It should provide me everything, which it doesn't. And that's the way I think the problem starts, where then I wanted to be happy, having more money. I wanted to be feeling more love, having more relationship. I wanted to whatever, so it's always the typical mantra of more should make me better and feel maybe not feel lonely. It doesn't work like that, right? So somehow, and in the end, when we experience loneliness, in the end, it really seems like the idea of what I call it spacious, luminous, warm hug. So spacious, luminous, warm hug to your own loneliness. Because the loneliness is the result of lack of these three qualities. It lacks the spaciousness because it is a pain identity. Basically, loneliness is identifying with the loneliness. It is a one very specific identity that you are stuck with. I am alone. I have no relationship. I have no job. My family has abandoned me. I don't feel connected enough with other people. So this is the identity that we are stuck with. So once you're stuck with the only real solution there seems like a very clearly being aware, as Sharon beautifully guided the practice, that this experience is the experience of condition, but there is some aspect of unconditional sense of yourself, which is giving a little bit more space to it, a little bit more awareness and connection to it, a little bit more compassion to it. So spacious, luminous, warm hug to your loneliness self. So if you're able to sit with that for 5-10 minutes, I am sure end of that 5-10 minutes, you will feel much more spacious, because that's what you have given to it. You will feel much more awareness, connection. Awareness means connection. You will feel it. You will feel much more warm. That means kind of compassion, love you're giving to it. You will feel it. So, and then not only you will feel more of that connection to what connection you are missing, but you will not wasting those moments to searching for something else. That moment you have found something. You're not searching for something. And that makes also, I think, is a big difference as a habit change.
Beautiful. Thank you, Rinpoche. Emily or Sharon, as we...
It feels like a beautiful ending thought and meditation and mantra. I just wanted to thank you for inviting me here so I can learn from great meditation teachers as well and bring it into my work. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Emily. It's been great to have you. Sharon, I know you just gave us a beautiful meditation, but maybe any last words as well.
This has been lovely, and I so appreciate also and the opportunity to be here. And I'm gonna take away that idea of the hug.
Thank you.
Sonny Rinpoche, who's one of my teachers, when he teaches, he calls it handshake practice, which is a little more stiff than a hug. So I think I'm going to revert.
We have a very strong community in Mexico. And the Mexicans have this word in Spanish that actually we in Argentina don't, which is apapacho. And apapacho is this kind of embrace from the soul, as I've been explaining. It's so beautiful, and I share that. And thinking of next month, and Rinpoche said, a lot of times we feel this, we need more to feel better. So next month, the topic is attachment, right? And so we'll start in June 3rd with a 24-hour full moon practice that it's called Embracing Attachment and Cultivating Generosity. And again, as I said, we'll do it all over from June 3rd at 10 a.m. New York time until the next, the June 4th, the same time. So everyone is welcome. And then also we'll have a teaching by Rinpoche and another dialogue. So join us in cybersangha.net. This will be recorded as well. Again, I want to thank you from the heart. I mean, really, Sharon, Emily, Rinpoche, thank you, thank you, thank you. And may we take that embrace for the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Cyber Sangha podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Cyber Sangha, visit us online at cybersangha.net.